Hey everybody, this is PJ Riley from Competition Archery Media.
My name is Hugo Lowe.
Hello, I'm Christina Percoli from San Marino.
Greetings, this is Jay Barsh from the 107 Club.
I'm Ryan, I'm with Anchor Point Archery in Goodyear, Arizona.
We are community Barebow! This is for the Barebow Project! Go Barebow!
This is
the Barebow Project!
And this is the Barebow Project.
And this is the Barebow Project.
And you're watching the Barebow Project.
And you're watching the Barebow Project.
I'm Grayson Partlow, and this is the Barebow Project. I think that was an 8.
Welcome back to the podcast. This is the first of the coaching series that I am doing. This is a Patreon exclusive as far as the video version goes. They're with the wonderful people who join the shooter school and get really personal with their training and their dedication to barebow and just archery in general. I think in some ways they get they're privy to some things, and this is going to be one of those things as I start this series. Originally the series was going to start with form stuff, but I'd posted out there on socials. I was like, we probably should hit some other things first. And when I did, as my good friend Christy, who's been on the podcast before, I was like, I think we need to, before we can talk about the foundation of shooting competition, we need to have a footer to put it on. And this is the stuff that I bet you probably, Christy, you probably learned some of this stuff by trial and error years ago. Mm-hmm. But now as and you're really an archery educator. You're more than just a judge. You've put it out there and have done multiple seminars and stuff, and I couldn't think anybody better to talk rules and just your overall experience, both with a club and shooting, as your whole background kind of fits this mold. So with that being said, this first episode is going to be all about what you need to know and it's catered toward the shooter, but it's also going to benefit coaches and parents. So with that being said, Christy Wapniarski, was that right?
That's all right. Yeah.
The platform is yours. I know we got some docs that we're going to share, and a presentation. So let's just get into it.
Okay. First, thank you for having me. Judging is actually the first place that I got involved in archery. It's definitely where my heart is. I also obviously do event organizing as well, run tournaments and stuff. But I love to be with the archers. I love to educate. I love to be, at the events and helping people learn how to do it, right? Because that's really what judging is about, safety and educating. So appreciate you having me on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to just kind of go over the agenda items that we're going to cover today.
And for those of you that end up tuning into this, this is going to be more of an educational type podcast. It's almost like taking a class per se. So, if it's dry at times, I'm sorry. Not all podcasts are, if you're always looking for entertainment, you might be searching for a long time. This is stuff that it's not always the most fun to talk about, but it's going to be so full of nuggets and information and stuff that you don't want to miss it either. Like, you have to be able to, there's got to be a want to be there, to quote Paul Donahue, having a new want to, I think it was, he said years ago on the Lancaster stage. But anyways, all right, here we go. Off with your agenda, my friend.
All right, so we're going to focus just on preparing for your first tournament as an archer, coach, or parent. I think, for myself as a parent, when I went into a first tournament, I didn't know anything. We went in blind. It was such a steep learning curve in the beginning. Even having a coach, a private coach, and being a part of a club still didn't have all of these details available to us as we started with tournaments and competition. So This is just information that is, you've done more tournaments, you just figure this stuff out, right? You start to learn because somebody mentioned something to you on the line. Someone says, hey, by the way, you're not supposed to do this. Hey, this is how this is done. So we're going to try to cover some of those topics today, just to kind of give people that edge as they're going into a tournament. They'll kind of have some knowledge around this. We'll start off with just some really basics of what to bring with you as an archer to your first tournament. Also, what you should bring with you as a coach or a spectator, as a parent. The details around arriving to your event, as well as preparing for equipment inspection, especially for those competitions that require you to go through equipment inspection. Just do some basic equipment rules, kind of just touch on some of the things that judges are really specifically looking for when it comes to barebow archery equipment at inspection. We'll cover line etiquette, kind of go over some of those little details, those things that a lot of archers don't know going in, and they start to learn because someone mentions it to them on the line. We'll cover some scoring basics, kind of go over scorecards. How exactly do you fill out the scorecard? What happens if you make a mistake on a scorecard? When you're down at the bail scoring, you know, and you need help because you don't know what the arrow value is, just kind of the basics of that. We'll touch base on equipment failures, how to handle them, but also what constitutes an equipment failure and medical issues. And then we'll just briefly touch on appeals, just so that going in, archers and parents, coaches are aware of what that appeals process is, when you can appeal, and what you need to have on hand to do that. All right. Did you want to jump off with what to bring as an archer, or do you want me to start there? Preference?
Yeah, I'll get started like for the first few. I guess I can. I'll share. Do you want to share the your doc, and then we'll go from there? It'll be all right.
Yep.
Since you have the. What happened? Oh, there it goes. Okay, you disappeared on me for a second, but it's back. So we talked back and forth about some ideas, and Christy was able to really put, and probably had some of this stuff kind of laid out already, but and we decided to put or she put a document together. I don't want to take credit for it. I'm just added host for this of sorts. And we wanted to get into, you know, very specific things that you don't learn even as a train, like when you go to training to become a USA Archery coach of sorts. This stuff, some of it might be common sense in some regards if the person has any kind of like sport experience, for as a coach or as a parent or even participant, but not all of it. And I think one thing that people underestimate is there's a lot of extra things that go into being prepared for a tournament outside of just practicing. So with that being said, what to bring with you as an archer, obviously all of your equipment, including any backup bows, finger tabs, gloves, finger slings, arrows, nocks, arrow rests, string, it says, etc. I'm going to go out and be a little bit more specific. Extra tabs specifically for outdoors. Case of rain, there's ways that you can manage the use of your tab to keep one dry while the other one is being used, and vice versa. I'll talk about that more offline, but and a plunger. Make sure that you have an extra plunger. If you don't have an extra bow, say you can't afford a backup bow, at least try to slowly piece one together over time. It is always best to have a backup bow, because if you do have a breakdown, in some tournament formats, there is no such thing as a breakdown. Either you can shoot or you can't. So you need to have that backup bow ready to go, or be able to fix things on the fly. Unscrew your plunger, throw a new one in case the plunger tip breaks or whatever. Same with rests and stuff like that. Protection from elements, hat, sunscreen, cooling towels, umbrellas, rain gear, and just an added coaching aspect to that. Be prepared. Like, don't just train in the morning in the middle of the summer. Train in the middle of the day, because you don't know when you're going to be shooting, and you don't know what the temperature is going to be. You really do have to be. You have to be prepared for the elements. You have to practice in those elements. And it's even from a tournament, not just a preparation aspect, but from an experience aspect. You need to practice in the wind, because, and Christy can verify. There's been multiple tournaments out in your neck of the woods where the wind was so crazy, people were aiming bales away just to hit the target. So like you have to be prepared for that stuff if that's the type of format you're going to be shooting. And then obviously water and snacks, I'm going to add to the water and snacks and say some kind of electrolyte drink, and snacks that don't make you run to the bathroom. That's another thing that you have to know. What else to bring as a coach or a spectator? Obviously, depending on the event, camping chairs, umbrellas, pop-up tents, binos or a spotting scope. Obviously, the toolkit for repairs, and same protection for elements, drinks, and snacks. And I'm going to add something to this from a coaching standpoint. Coaches, spectators, parents, when you are at a tournament, you are not part of the tournament for that shooter. And I say it in that way because a lot of times there's coaches that like to crowd their shooter per se. And you're just there as support staff and sort of as a cheerleader in some aspects. Don't be the helicopter parent or the helicopter coach. Train your shooter so that they can function on their own independently as they need to, moving into, obviously that varies by level of experience of shooter. If it's a new shooter first tournament, you might be a little bit more hands-on. That's okay. But as they go, like your job is to train them to become more independent. So I just like I just went to move it down and I couldn't because it's not my screen, it's yours. So just like keep that food for thought when you're looking at that number 2 bullet point there, what to bring with you as a coach or a spectator. Like that's your job. So the things that you're bringing are related to your job for that day. And it's less about, just make it all about the shooter. Arrive at the event approximately 1 hour before shooting begins to set up and prepare for equipment inspection. And I'm sure that Christy can talk a little bit more into equipment inspection later. But check the online scoring system or for post-to target assignments. Keep in mind that now most tournaments are using some kind of online format for judging. There's multiple out there now. I remember years ago, we only had like 1 or 2 archers and I guess
NCO. Yeah.
NCO, yeah. That's pretty much it. But now there's multiple. There's some that are free. There's some that are just minimal subscriptions, and there's some really good ones out there. Be prepared, get used to it, look it up in advance. Be aware of any restrictions about where coaches or spectators are allowed. That's a great reminder, because we aren't, as coaches, and this should apply to all coaches, you have certain areas that you're allowed to be, and you're not supposed to be past that area. I mean, Target Nationals is a prime example. It's very well laid out. There's tents for outdoor Target Nationals, and coaches have restrictions. And I think that maybe there's some, you'll see other coaches that might be up there, but they could be helping an archer with like some kind of disability, or there's other things that go on. So don't just assume because you see someone up there, oh, I must be allowed to go up there too. Just check in advance. And the third bullet point there, how to present equipment at inspection, and bring your backup equipment as well. You have to get both inspected. Mark arrows with initials, be prepared to answer questions from the judge, and be compliant with the dress code from head to toe, which really shouldn't be an issue. I mean, that's a pretty standard thing. You want to scroll down a little bit to number 4 there. And then just some basic equipment rules. There should be no blemishes or marks on the sight window area. This is obviously a Barebow specific topic. Be prepared to tape it or color it if the judge requests it. Same applies to colored risers. 2 centimeter max from pressure point to pivot point of the grip. That's an interesting one because it's not frequently discussed, that measurement thing.
It's not one we commonly see in Barebow. I've never seen it violated in a Barebow setup. I've seen it in compound, but it's not common. So
finger tap specifics for Barebow, I think we'll probably go over some of that. Stitching is uniform in size and only has one color. Markings must be uniform in size, shape, and color with up to 2 lengths of lines. No tactile or audible draw check devices or tabs. Sear tab okay if no movable parts. I guess the bottom line to that, and I think we'll probably talk about that later in the tab. There's a slide with tabs on it. The idea there being that it has to be fixed. Whatever it is that you're using as a sear has to be fixed. Center serving of the string may not end within the archer's plane of vision at full draw. Face and string walking are allowed. Vibration dampeners and weights permitted above and below the grip in any combination as long as they fit through the ring. That's really the key component with anything you're putting on your bow is that 12.2 centimeter ring. But they cannot be attached using an angular bracket, although that is openly described anymore, and do not require dampeners to flex on it. Everything must fit through that ring that we talked about. So anything you want to add there as I was going through? I know I kind of read it verbatim, Christy, but before we go into line etiquette?
I just think the biggest things when you come up for equipment inspection, the reason why I say be prepared to answer questions from a judge is because that's what judges are taught to do. We're taught to ask questions when it comes to seeing something that we may not see commonly on a bow. Doesn't mean that it's not allowed, just means we ask the archer, what is this for? How do you use this? What is this on here? And the expectation is that the archer is able to answer that, right? That they know what they're using and why they're using it. And sometimes we get kids that are like, I have no idea, my coach put it on there, whatever. But be prepared to do that. I don't think that because a judge is questioning you, that they're questioning whether or not you're using legal equipment necessarily. It really is part of our training as judges that we ask those questions. So we want to hear that archers know what they're using and what their equipment entails. So I sometimes hear or see online, maybe an archer will go, oh, I went to this tournament and this judge questioned me, and they're, kind of like almost in an accusatory way of like, this judge thought I was using something that I shouldn't be, or, why wouldn't this be allowed? But that's really not the case. I mean, we genuinely ask questions. We're trying to engage with the archers as they're coming through that equipment inspection, maybe ease some of the anxiety that might be there since they're, at the tournament or whatever. So don't assume that judges are out to get you, because we're really not. As far as basic equipment rules, no, I think you got everything. Those are, I kind of highlight the A for where there's no blemishes. These are like the key things we're always looking for. A lot of times judges will have tape, but if not, you need to either have tape or have it accessible to you if you have to tape over your riser, the sight window. Finger tabs, we're always looking at finger tabs, of course. There's a lot of details there. And then that center serving string, we always are looking at that when an archer is up at the line doing practice ends, so that we can see whether or not that serving is ending right at the plane of vision when they're at full draw. I see that occasionally, and usually when I approach an archer about that, they're just not even aware that that's a thing, that that's a rule. So they don't know how to address it exactly. And, I always try to say, like, either you can remove some serving or you can add serving. Those are your two quick fixes, while you're at a tournament to be able to move forward with compliance. All right, line etiquette. I'm actually going to probably switch over to sharing the sharing this here.
Sounds good.
My mouse is disappearing. There we go. All right. So just real quick on target assignments, just wanted to put this up there. Sometimes we get archers that, when they're at an indoor event, when there's 4 target faces up and we're using like the verticals along with the single spots, they might not know exactly where the A, B, C, D lineup is. So when you get your target assignment, this is a nice reference to be able to see where your shooting position is going to be based off of indoor target faces. This here just kind of demonstrates how you present your bow when you come up to the judges. This is what judges are looking for there on the left. You just are going to hold your bow out just like that, put your hands underneath the limb pockets, and just hold it so that they can, view everything the way they need to. And then on the right there is just showing that 12.2 centimeter ring that everything must fit through. I myself will, as a judge, run the ring through, but you might find judges that don't want to. They'll have the archer run the ring over their equipment, so they might hold it by the string like that. So either way is acceptable. You'll find judges do it both ways. Here's some pictures of tabs. Since we talked about tabs, we'll just go over this real quick. The three on the left here are all compliant tabs. I'd say the Yost tab is probably the most common that I see these days, which is lovely every time I see it, because you just know that there's nothing to even be worried about on it. It's always compliant. The one down on the bottom left shows some marks that have been taped over. That's acceptable. If somebody wants to tape over the existing markings, they can do that with the tape. The one in the center there, that's an example of a sear being used, where there's like a cutout there where the thumb would be at the edge of the plate. That is acceptable because it's fixed, like you said. As long as there's nothing movable, then it would be compliant. On the one on the right here, oops, sorry. Oof.
No worries.
I'm trying to move I can't even see I can't see it. There we go. All right, so yeah, the one on the right, it's got a third marking, and that was why that one is not compliant. So one of the fixes to this is you could put tape over a portion of the lines to make it so that there's only 2 lines that are actually seen, and then that would be a usable tab. But because of those 2 line restrictions, you can't use the one on the right as is. All right, so I'm going to go into line etiquette. We'll pause on this screen as far as talking about it. When it comes to, tournaments, you have, under World Archery rules, I want to preface that all of this is based on World Archery rules. When you're doing an indoor tournament, you are to be provided with a minimum of an 80-centimeter space for your lane, and an outdoor, you're provided 90-centimeter minimum. You may have more than that depending on how a field is set up, but that's the minimum that you're required to be given. And the expectation is that all of your equipment is going to fit within that space. So indoor is obviously a little bit more crowded, but you still are going to, they're going to expect you to keep your bow, your quiver, the arrow sticking out of your quiver, and everything have to stay within that space. You need to be making sure that you are kind of centered in that space, preferably. No swinging the bow, right? That bow limb going off to the side, going over into someone else's.
Pause sharing. You're good. Don't worry.
Thank you. Yeah, that limb, flying over to the side, that's something that, archers next to you can complain about. Judges will get involved. Make sure you're paying attention to where your arrows are poking and you're not poking the archer behind you. So just everything needs to stay in that space. That's all a big part of line etiquette with shooting. For outdoor tournaments, scope usage is allowed, but there are a couple of rules around it. The biggest thing is that it cannot create an obstacle for another archer. And so scope height has a restriction in the rules, and that is that it can only go as high as the shortest archer's armpit height when they are at full draw. That rule came about because of media. And it's so that scopes don't block the archer's face when they're trying to take pictures of them. So it's not like a disadvantage kind of situation, but that's where some of these rules come from, is media based. So that's one of those things. Archers need to be able to agree about usage as well. So sometimes you'll see that like the tripod legs will cross over between 2 lanes, shooting lanes. That's fine. Sometimes that has to happen to make them both fit on the line, but the archers that are using them will need to agree to the use of them. If they cannot agree and a judge has to get involved, a judge is going to pull it off the line. So we just always tell archers, we need you to figure it out. We want you to work it out. Otherwise, you're going to have to pull your scope on and off the line every single end. So, all right, so 2 beeps. When you hear 2 beeps or whistles, that indicates you can come to the line, you can knock your arrow, but you are not allowed to raise a bow arm until the single signal is given for shooting. And we don't want you walking up to the line with an arrow in your hand or on your bow. If you do that, all you're doing is drawing attention to yourself from judges. So just wait until you get up to the line. 3 beeps or whistles is clear to go down range. Those are just the basics with the timing signals. When you're on the line, talking is not allowed. So no archers are supposed to be talking. You shouldn't be talking to archers next to you. You shouldn't be talking to archers behind you at the waiting line. No talking to your coach or your parents. There is coaches are allowed to speak to their archers. So they can speak back up to the line, but they cannot disrupt other archers. So if an archer feels like a coach is being too loud or talking too much, or it's disrupting them in any way, and they say something to a judge, we have no choice but to ask the coach to be quiet, or the parent to be quiet. So make sure that reasonable volume is used so that you're not disturbing any other archers. As far as when it comes to moving on and off the line, some people believe there's rules about how you're supposed to do that, as far as like that you have to wait until an archer's not shooting or something like that. And there is absolutely no rules about that. So as far as in the US, it's a common courtesy that people will provide for other athletes. But at an international level competitions, you will never see archers do that courtesy. So what the rules do say, though, is that when you are finished shooting, you're to immediately retire behind the waiting line. That's actually the words in the rules. We do allow archers to give that courtesy if they want to wait while an archer next to them's at full draw until they shoot. That's fine, but you're not required to. And you never want to be the last archer on the line spotting your arrows. That will draw attention from judges. So make sure you are retiring behind the waiting line when you're finished. If you want to spot an arrow back behind the waiting line if you really need to. Otherwise, you're going to be walking down range anyways. If the arrow's shot, right? So let's see. So 3-meter line. This is one that there's sometimes confusion about. If an arrow drops out, like you go to pull it out of your quiver, you're trying to put it on, it falls off of your bow, that is not a shot arrow. So that's, you dropped it, it didn't come shooting out of your bow. So it's, it's within the 3-meter line distance, you just go ahead and grab another arrow, shoot another arrow, leave that one on the ground. If it does, for some reason, misfire, come off of your bow in some way, but stays within any part of the shaft, any part of it is still within that 3-meter line zone, then you're fine to go ahead and shoot another arrow. It's considered an unshot arrow. But there is a difference between dropping an arrow and shooting an arrow. So if it's dropped, it's not shot, it's unshot arrow. If you, and that is obviously, it can't rebound. So, the way our fields are set up, sometimes you have like a tented lane number might be out in front of you. If you had a kind of a misfire, it hits that lane number and rebounds back into the 3-meter line area. That doesn't apply. That would be considered a shot arrow because it rebounded back. Bounce outs and hanging arrows. If you ever experience that from, young archers shooting low poundage, or if you're sometimes just tournament equipment will be really hard or firm in the center. If you have any kind of arrows bounce out or rebound or hanging, you want to stop shooting. You want to get the attention of a judge. You want to let them guide you on how to handle that. You should not keep shooting. You should always stop and raise your hand. And this is where it comes in. It's really important to make sure you're marking arrow holes. The reason why we're marking arrow holes is so that when situations like this happen, we can preserve your score and make sure that you still get credit for the arrow that you did shoot. Shooting out of time. So this one's also, there's some misconception around this one. The 3 beeps that come, the 3 whistles at the end,
Just a reminder, all Patreon subscribers get the full video version and attend these live educational type podcasts. Check it out. Link is in the bio. Get access to the Shooter School and all exclusive content through Patreon. Thanks for listening.
Shooting out of time is determined based off of the start of that first sound, audible sound. It's not about what time's on the clock, it's the sound. And it's from where you're at the shooting area. You'll have a judge around you that will be paying attention. But the second that audible sound starts, that's when you've shot out of time if you release after that. If you do shoot out of time, your highest arrow value is taken. It's marked a miss. So you'll lose your highest arrow value if you shoot out of time. Never shoot out of time. There's never a benefit, actually. So make sure you're paying attention to that. No electronic communication devices are to be used in front of the waiting line. So I know a lot of people train with earbuds in their ears, listening to music while they're practicing. That's not allowed at competitions. It's not allowed during official practice. It's not allowed during, scoring as well. You actually can't walk down to the bail to go score with headphones in your ears. You can't be using your phone. That means no social media, no sitting there and chatting and texting and whatever while you're walking back and forth. You definitely can't be using the phone as, for phone calls. So no communication with your coach or anybody else. You can use a phone when you're downrange to plot arrows. If you have an app that is, for that, you can. And World Archery does now allow for photos to be taken. So if you have a great group and you want to take a picture of it so you can document it and share it later, they want to promote the sport. So that's permitted, but you just can't communicate using that phone. You can take pictures with it. No flash photography is ever allowed with archery. That really applies indoor more than anything, but there's no flash photography. And one of the big things I think we see, I see this at every tournament I've ever gone to, is that archers, when they set up their bow, they love to draw back, right? They love to draw their string back, set. Sometimes they're just plucking to set the limbs. That's one thing. But if you want to draw back for whatever reason, you have to be at the shooting line to do that. You can't be back in the archer's area drawing back your bow. The rules state it pretty clearly that you have to be at the line, even if you're without an arrow. It doesn't matter if you have an arrow in your bow or not. So you want to make sure you're up at the shooting line doing that. All right, so on to scoring. Unless you have anything you want to add, I know.
No, you covered it all wonderfully. So we can definitely just move on to scoring.
Okay. All right. So when it comes to scoring, when you go down to score, there is only the requirement that there's a minimum of 2 archers at a bail in order to score properly. If you happen to be on a target and multiple people didn't show up, you're the only one, you need to pair up with the bail next to you in order to score. There has to be a minimum of 2 people to score. Scorers, okay, so there's 3 different roles when it comes to scoring. You have scorers, you have a caller, and you have a verifier. Now, the scores are going to be the paper and electronic, or if there's 2 paper scorecards, right? You'll have 2 people doing paper. Your caller can be a third party. If there's a third person there, they can be the one that just calls all the arrows for everybody while the scorers are writing it down and putting it into the electronics. And then a verifier is kind of that 4th person, just to give them a job. They make sure that they're paying attention to everything that's going on, making sure things are being called properly and that things are being written down. One of the common questions we get, and one of the things I love to stress to archers, especially as they're new, is that if you want to call your own arrows, you absolutely can. There is nothing that says that you have to let a caller call your arrows. If you want to call them every end, you can do that. The other people can still verify and still write down. But the reality is that you're responsible as an archer to make sure that your arrows are being called and that they are being recorded correctly. So I always recommend that archers pay attention as they're being written down on a scorecard and that they're being written down correctly, because paper is what matters. So It doesn't matter what's being put in the electronics, it's what's being put on that paper. So make sure you check. If you happen to miss the bail at some point during your shooting, when you go down to score, you can go ahead and participate in the scoring process. But when you go to retrieve your missed arrows, you should leave your other arrows in the bail. The reason for this is because it's safety based, right? If there are arrows still left in a target, then as judges, we know not to clear the field. We know that there's still somebody out on the field. They might be behind a bail where we can't see them. So always retrieve your arrows first, then come back and pull the remaining arrows from the target. Don't ever touch the arrows. This one is a common one, especially, well, it's all ages. I see all ages touch arrows.
I was just going to say, this is definitely across the board. More popular amongst the younger shooters in the sport. However, without a doubt, there are adults that do, especially leaning against the bail in some fashion. I mean, I get, like, because we're all try to be practical people, and you're like, hey, my hand is standing right here. There's right here on the round bail. It's not going to affect those arrows, but it's the principle of the matter. The rule is the rule. Just follow it. So moving
100%. Yeah. No touching, no leaning. I always put that. And just be aware of your surroundings. I mean, I've seen people that are just like in la la land, and then they're bumping arrows as they're walking around the target. And you absolutely can impact a score, an arrow value by doing that. So just always have awareness. Make sure that all the arrow values are recorded on the paper and in the tablet, verifying totals between both scores before you mark or remove arrows. So that's the other thing. Sometimes I see people that they walk straight up to that target and they start marking the arrow holes because that was their assigned job, right? And it's like, don't mark the arrow holes, don't touch anything until all the arrow values have been called and written down on the paper. So when it comes to marking arrow value or marking the arrow holes, if you want to share the screen again, I think that's the one we were on. The rules.
Here, well, actually, you have the presentation,
Oh,
so you go ahead and share that.
All right. So this is, I don't know who teaches marking arrow holes, but there is actually a guidebook in World Archery that demonstrates how to do them properly. And they basically state that you are to mark arrow holes suitably. That's kind of what the rule says. So it's not very defined in the rules, but the guidebook does say that it should be 2 lines at right angles, approximately 5 millimeters long. So the bottom right-hand corner, that's the proper way to mark arrow holes. We're not supposed to be marking them darker, pointing more towards the center. Obviously this carrot, I call it the carrot that these kids do all the time, and this slash like a V. Using pen or pencil, not Sharpie, because we're not supposed to be creating bold aiming points. If judges see that, they're going to change the target face. So mark arrow holes properly. Make sure you're always marking every single arrow hole, because again, it really is to protect you. If there's pass-throughs, bounce outs, or any anomalies like that, that's going to be how you preserve your score. So
hey, quick question. When you hit a previous arrow hole, what is the procedure to marking?
It really depends on how it got hit. If it expanded the hole at all, if it was a little off to one side, I always try to create additional lines so that basically what we're trying to prevent is when you go and hit near another arrow, where an arrow has already been hit and there's already been marks. If that was a bounce out space, we want to make sure that we would be able to identify that it was an unmarked hole technically. So I'm always really careful about marking in the 2 directions also, because that's really important. If you're only ever marking like these V's, then you can, hit on another side, or you can hit smack in the middle of that V and it looks like it's a marked hole all of a sudden, right? So that's why they want you to do it at 2 like 90 right angles, 90-degree angles. So yeah, it's, judges, we can usually identify unmarked holes pretty well, but if you're not marking them properly, then it's going to be at your detriment essentially. But you definitely want to continue to mark, even if you hit in the same hole. Make sure you go back, make sure that hole, even if it's larger or whatever, it's marked properly. Pass-through situations. This is one when it happens to archers, they really don't understand how to handle it, and it usually works against them. When you suspect that you have had a pass-through, you are never to go touch the arrow. If it's back behind the bale, it's on the ground, whatever, the first thing you do is immediately call a judge over. A judge has to be involved in any pass-through situations in order for you to receive any kind of arrow value. So if you go and you pick up that arrow and then go, oh my gosh, I had a pass-through, it was right down here on the ground and whatever, the evidence is gone for us, and therefore we can't call an arrow value for a pass-through. So first thing, always just call a judge over, let a judge handle any kind of a pass-through situation. Scorecard examples. So these scorecards are INCO versions of scorecards. You've got indoor on the left, and then it looks like outdoor example on the right. When it comes to marking your scorecards, obviously the key things are, write legibly. You always, please, always write in descending order. So this is something that new archers commonly don't know. Always start with your highest arrow values, or start in the center of the target essentially and work your way out to the outer rings while you're calling your arrow values. When it comes to indoor, you have 10s and 9s that need to be documented. The purpose behind this is because that's how we break ties, should they be same scores at the end of a competition. So on line 1 example there, you have 10, 9, 8, total of 27. You have 1 10 and 1 9. So you would put that in there. Next line, 9, 9, 6, total of 24. Then you have your running total. So you take 27, 24, add them together. That's where you get your running total. But you would continue to just put how many 10s and 9s you have. That is not a running total of 10s and 9s, which a lot of archers will confuse. You'll only put how many there is in that end, and then at the bottom, you'll add them up. On these scorecards, these are your outdoor scorecards. So here we're documenting X's and 10s. On the left, this is just a qualification round. The concept is the same as the indoor, except for that you've got the 10s and X's. On the first one, I gave an example that the archer shot both an X and a 10. So when you get to the 10s column on the right there, it should be 2 because an X is equal to 10 and then your 10 is there. So you actually shot 2 10s technically and only 1 X. So that's how that would be documented. Going down to the next line, they didn't shoot any 10s or X's, so they're both zeros there. Archers will commonly leave those blank or they will put slashes. Technically, you're always supposed to put numbers. There's always supposed to be numbers in there. Some hosts will accept cards that have slashes, but you should never leave them blank. That's not completely filling out your scorecard in the eyes of a tournament organizer. When you have a miss, it's represented by the M as shown in N2 there on arrow value number 6. So put an M in there that represents the 0. When it comes to arrow calling, so obviously all the archers are calling the arrows as they see them on the target. When an arrow is touching a line, and I say touching because that's what determines the arrow value, is where the shaft lies in the target face. So sometimes I commonly hear people say, well, it didn't break the line, meaning the line didn't separate. That's not a thing in world archery, in USA archery. That's not existent. Maybe that might exist in other organizations I'm not aware of, but it is only where it touches. It doesn't matter if the line's broken or not. So if the shaft is bumped up against that 9 ring, then it's a 9 and it would be the higher arrow value. Now, what happens commonly, especially in tournaments where competitors are put on the same target together, archers will have disagreements about what the arrow value is. A lot of times it's because the competitor doesn't want the person to get the higher arrow value. So they will have a disagreement. If that's the case, just raise your hand, call a judge over. I always encourage archers to call a judge anytime you don't agree. Even if you don't feel like you can speak out, you have the right to call a judge over to get assistance with an arrow call. The caveat to that is that whatever the judge calls it is final. There is no appealing an arrow value when it comes to a judge's call. Arrows that deflect. So if you shot an arrow, it hit another arrow shaft and deflects off into, say the arrow shaft it hit was in the 9 ring, it deflects off into the 7 ring and lands in the 7 ring, it's a 7. The only time that would not be the case is if it was embedded in the other arrow, like if it was a Robin Hood, then it would score the same arrow value of that arrow. Or if it went through the fletching and was hanging by the fletching, then you would get the same arrow value as the one that it was hanging through. So ties, like I said, the reason why we document X's and 10s and 9s in the indoor scorecards is because that's how we break ties. In an outdoor situation, if the totals were the same between archers, then we'd first look at 10s. Whoever had the highest number of 10s would be the winner. If the 10s were the same, then we go to X's. And for indoors, we start with 10s, then we go to 9s if they're the same. Now on the elimination scorecard over here on the right, this example here kind of shows, this is between ends, by the way, as far as scorecards go, commonly used in the US. The 32nd round, this archer had a bye. So that's why there's an X in the win box. That's what indicates that that's a bye. So that archer knows they're not shooting the first match. In the second match, they start entering arrow values. This just kind of demonstrate that we do a set point system for Barebow. and it is based off of what your score is for the end compared to the other archer you're shooting against, and whoever has the higher arrows total would be the winner for that end and would receive 2 points. 0 points for the lower, and if it's a tied score, you each would split the points and get 1 each. So you can see on the second end, they got the 2 points. You start doing the running total of set points is down that right column. So all right, so now we're going to talk about correcting a scorecard. So there's 2 different ways that you can make corrections to scorecards, and there's 2 different things to be aware of. When you have arrow values that need to be edited because you by accident wrote down a 9 and you actually meant for it to be a 10, you can do that on the scorecard. As long as the arrows are still in the target and they haven't been pulled, you can make corrections to a scorecard like this. If you do that at the bail, all the archers on the target have to initial the scorecard. That's the proper way to make corrections as archers at the bail, which you are entitled to do. If you don't want to have 2, 3, 4 archers initial the scorecard and there was an issue, you can ask a judge to come over. They can do the same thing. They'll do it in their red pen. It only requires the 1 initial of the judge, okay? That only applies to arrow values. For some reason, sometimes archers believe that any correction made on a scorecard has to be initialed. If you messed up on your math, does not need to be initialed. You can make corrections to any math at any time by erasing, scribbling out, whatever. I mean, obviously make it so it can be read by the scoring team, but only arrow value changes need to be initialed by the archers or a judge. Now, multi-face scoring is something that will only apply if you are shooting a competition that either requires a multi-face face, like a 3-spot like this, or if you choose to shoot one. Most of the time you have options at indoor to do a single spot or a multi-face. If you do a multi-face, it's just important to know how are you supposed to score these arrows. In this situation, you've got an archer shot an 8 in the top face. They shot a 9 and a 7 in the middle, but they missed the bottom. They didn't shoot anything in the bottom. In this situation, the proper way to score is to take the highest arrow value of the arrows that had 2, or the face that had more than 1 arrow in it, and mark it a miss. So now you have assigned a value to every single one of these arrows. And instead of the result being 9, 8, 7 miss, the result is actually 8, 7 miss for 15 total. So this is the proper way to score a multi-face target face.
Perfect.
All right. I just have equipment failures to go over and appeals. Is there anything you wanted to throw in or add?
No, I don't think so. I think the only thing I want to emphasize on the scorecard side of things is, especially with kids, I think more so than adults, advise them to go up and visually score their arrows before. And when I say visually, I emphasize visually. Don't touch them. Don't touch anybody else's arrows. Visually look at them and get an idea of what your score already is. And then if you're not the arrow caller, just match what your opinion is to the ones that the arrow caller calls. If you agree, great. If you don't agree, then is the process? And I don't know if this is written. I think it is the process still the target bail? Everybody looks at it first, or do you just automatically call a judge? Because I see a lot of times it's just, oh, you don't agree, I'm calling a judge. And I think there's a way to find a resolution to that, correct?
Yeah, so as a judge myself, when I come up to a bail and they say, can you please call this arrow? The first question I ask is there a disagreement, and has everybody tried calling the arrow first? Because sometimes they are all in agreement. They just don't know it because they haven't even expressed it yet. And so I always make them go through the process and everybody try to call the arrow first. And they may all agree that it was a 10 and they didn't need a judge. But if there is a valid disagreement between two of the archers, then I will step in and call the arrow.
Yeah. So your target bail, your target mates should all look at it and give their opinion on what the arrow is, and then if there is still a tie, call the judge. If there's not a tie, do they still have the right to call a judge? Say 3 of the 4 say, we think it's out, and the shooter thinks it's in. Can they still call a judge after that?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to put this out there because that's a common issue that comes up where especially kids they go right for call a judge. And so that changes if there's only 2 of you on a bail. That makes things a little, maybe in some ways a little less complicated. It's just the 2 of you. So if you call and then your bailmate disagrees, you can go right for a judge immediately. And just emphasize, like, check the scorecard. Once the scorecard is written, if you got to look over the person writing on the paper scorecard, look over their shoulder. Make sure it is written appropriately. I remember a few years ago, Real Wild shot in I think it was like a World Cup or something, shot this amazing score and made a mathematical error that he signed off on and lost the tournament. I don't even think he placed in the tournament, and he would have won it. But all because he made a mathematical error that he signed off on, he ended up not even in contention. And it was because the mathematical error was done, it was documented, it was signed off, and it was handed in. They found it later on. Is it a technicality? Sure. However, that's what happens when you get complacent with how you're scoring and what you're writing down. And for those of you that shoot somewhere near and around national or world record scores, that becomes, I mean, I've submitted many national world record scorecards for shooters or documented them for shooters. It's a big deal. So you have to make sure that everything is just right, because God forbid you put out pending national record and then find out that your scorecard was messed up and you don't get it. So anyways, moving on. Equipment failures.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I forgot to kind of mention and stress how important it is that when you go to turn in your scorecards, it's always announced at tournaments. Usually make sure you check everything, every single box is filled in, including, that you put your signature on there, but you should never put your signature on it until you've gone over it, you've verified it, made sure that it obviously is accurate, that you're signing what's accurate. Because the rules, what happened to Rio, it's because of the rules, right? It's very explicit in the rules that if you have something like that, then that's the accepted the total. So all right, equipment failures. That's something that is still acknowledged at local, state, national level competitions. World ranking events in World Archery, they do not have equipment failures anymore, but we do still have them at every event level below. So we're just going to talk real quick about what qualifies as equipment failures. The biggest thing I just want to stress that, World Archery kind of put out there several years ago.
Your mic volume all of a sudden dropped.
Huh.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, maybe I put something over.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah,
Sorry.
you're good now. No, you're very good now.
Okay. World Archery put out some specific details about equipment failures before they removed them back in like 2019. And one of the things they say is, in order for it to be an equipment failure for purposes of World Archery rules, the item must reasonably relate to the athlete's performance and must not be something that is reasonably common or expected to occur during a competition, and it must not be due to the athlete's intentional or negligent actions. So examples of that are like a broken knock on an arrow. Yep, those are expected to happen. So that is not considered a valid equipment failure, but something like your arrow rest breaking, your sight, breaking or something coming off on that, stabilizers, all of those things are all valid equipment that is relied upon for an athlete to perform. And so that would be an equipment failure. You could raise your hand, call a judge over. Judges have to verify the equipment failure. So be prepared to explain to them what's happened and that they can be able to visually look at that and say, yes, okay, this is valid. Make sure you tell them, how many arrows do I have left to shoot? I shot 3, I have 3 left because I'm outdoors. So make sure they know that so they can call that information in and be prepared for it. One of the common misconceptions in equipment failures is how much time do you have to make up that, like how much time do you have to fix your equipment? There is no time limit to how long you can spend to fix or repair your equipment. And there is no restrictions on how many equipment failures you can technically have in a competition. So where there is restrictions is how many arrows you can make up. So when you are in an outdoor situation, the max amount of arrows you'll be able to make up is 2 ends worth. So if it takes you 3 ends to fix your equipment, you're taking misses on one of those ends. You will only get to make up 2. For indoor, you can make up a max of 3. So same thing, if it takes longer than that, you'll just take misses. And makeups arrows should always be made up at the earliest convenience. When it comes to outdoor, we try to do that right away so that the conditions are as, equivalent to what they were when everybody else was shooting as possible. Indoor doesn't matter. It's a controlled environment. So you can make up all the arrows at the very end of the competition, and that's pretty normal. One thing I definitely want to stress is that if you ever have an equipment failure and you notify the judge and step off and go fix it, and let's say there's still 30 seconds left on the clock and you want to walk back up to that line, I do not ever recommend that an archer does that.
Yeah.
Because the second you walk back up to that line and start shooting again, they cannot extend time for you. You are required to complete your arrows in the time that's left, no matter what at that point.
Yeah.
If you had 3 arrows to shoot and you can't get them off in 30 seconds, you're taking misses for whatever you don't get. If you wait though, and let them finish out that end, then the makeup time that they will give you will be the full time for 3 arrows. So don't ever go back up unless you have 1 arrow and you really think you can get it off, then you can, but just know that they won't give you additional shooting time.
For clarification purposes, say you shoot 3 arrows, it's outdoor target, you shoot 3 arrows. Do you get the full allotment for 6 arrows to shoot your 3 makeup arrows?
No.
Okay.
You only get the 40 seconds per arrow for the 3 arrows. So 120 seconds. That's at your national levels. Unless you're shooting world ranking timing, then that's 30 seconds an arrow. So,
got it.
But you do get that full time. So if something happens, let's say there's a timing malfunction and there was only 20 seconds left on the clock, but you still had 1 arrow left to shoot, and they stop shooting and they go and find out, okay, we have all the people left still had 1 arrow left to shoot. They need to put the 40 seconds back on the clock. They don't put 20 seconds just because that's what was left. So you should get the full amount available to you in situations like that. Last thing is appeals. So basically a ruling by a judge can be appealed except for arrow calls and a yellow card during team rounds. Those are the only 2 times that you cannot appeal, but you can appeal everything else. If you feel like a ruling by a judge was inaccurate, you have the rule book and you know exactly what rule, that was not taken into consideration, you can file an appeal. You just have to give your intent, and you can give that verbally to the chair of judges within 5 minutes of the end of the relevant round or match or before the next one starts. And that's when it's going to affect the progression of an athlete from one stage to the next. So between a qualification round and an elimination round, something like that. Your written appeal has to be submitted with the rules reference. So you need to make sure you know what rules you're talking about, but referencing the rules, and you have to provide $50 cash to the COJ within 15 minutes. So after you've given your intent. So I always recommend for coaches to come prepared and have cash on them anytime they go to a competition. So that way, if there's a need for an appeal, they're prepared and able to file one.
What are some things that you've seen appeals filed for?
Oh gosh. I've seen appeals filed because archers were ranked incorrectly and paired up incorrectly in an elimination match, and the archer shot the match and won, but they had to redo it because technically it wasn't a valid match. They weren't up against the correct opponent, and then they ended up losing the second time around. And so there was an appeal filed for that. Very valid appeal. Do not get me wrong. Like, I would have appealed it too.
Yeah.
You know, an athlete feels wronged in a situation like that, but
Sure.
it was an error. And the reality is the match wasn't a valid match to start with. So I've seen appeals filed because target faces weren't changed for all the athletes in a competition from one round to another. I mean,
Okay.
I've seen where an archer was given a miss for not shooting 3 arrows that all matched when they were shooting an elimination. And because their knock was a different color on one of their arrows, a judge gave them a miss for it. And so a coach, thankfully, filed an appeal in that situation because it was a wrong call by a judge, but it happens. I mean,
Sure.
judges are human, they make mistakes, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, I've seen a lot of different reasons. I've seen valid reasons, I've seen invalid reasons, you know, but you know, it's an archer's right, it's a coach's right to file something if they feel like their athlete's been wronged. So.
Yeah, I think I've only done it twice, and once or twice, or no, one time in my career as a coach. Second time, I had an archer who wanted an appeal, but I said that, but I wouldn't do it. Well, the parent wanted me to have the appeal because there was a bounce out on a 3D target, and they claimed that in that specific format, you still scored the arrow if the archers can agree where it hit. Well, that archer obviously said it hit the 10 or whatever, and the other two archers both said no, it was an 8, and that shooter ended up getting second place in the nation instead of first because of it. So it was a highly contested situation, but it was like 9-year-old kids, and I was like, you're not filing an appeal on that. It is what it is. Like, you're just gonna have to take your second place. But anyways, yeah, but I did have one other one, which was and a lot of appeals isn't something they teach you about in coaching certifications, and they do exist for good reason. However, depending on the tournament format or the organization you're in. Now, today, obviously, we're talking USA Archery, indoor rounds, outdoor rounds, head-to-head matches, stuff like that. This may lead to ASA, NFAA, similar topic discussions down the road, but I haven't gotten there yet. Because there's not one of you for all of those organizations. That's why. But I might have to just become that person and run through that those rules and whatnot, talk to those organizers. But with that being said, coaches, be prepared for it. It could happen at any time, and it's the strangest stuff that happens. I mean, I've seen near fistfights at tournaments already, and it's crazy that stuff happens. But look at the world we live in; it's not a surprise. So be prepared for those very unique, weird situations. And I think the most important thing to remember is that despite maybe feeling that something happened that was unjust, always keep a calm and level head about all of it. Know your rules, refer to your rules, and then and make sure that I even do this as a basketball official. Everybody knows that I ref basketball. Like when a coaches ask me, and it's essentially it's an appeal, when they ask me or question a call, I always give a rules-based answer. This is the rule. This is what happened. This is what I saw. This is what we're doing moving forward. And that's all you can do. So like coaches, you need to sort of get your nose in the rule book and understand the way the rules are written and why they're written the way they are. Anyways, moving on from appeals, unless we're good with everything.
Yeah, no, that's it for appeals. That's all I had for my topics. So
Yeah, no, that covers all of it. I mean, if I can think of anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and maybe just record and add to it. But like from the first tournament standpoint, did we Do we truly? Oh yeah, we finished line etiquette. That's right. It's one of those things where I think these are just this is so involved, and there's so many layers to this onion of getting started in tournaments that it's so hard to really provide it all. Like there's stuff that we missed even that's going to happen that you guys are going to experience. But let's go over some questions. I see there's some activity in the chat here. So we had a score. This is from one of our live viewers. We had a score issue in a tournament today that changed the results. It was caught before cards were signed. Oh, okay. That was probably when we were in the discussion when we were talking about like Rio and how, yeah, it happens. It happens, and you got to find it and document it correctly. What if you break someone else's equipment or like knock over a bow? That absolutely happens, probably at every tournament in some capacity. How does an archer, let's talk about that from a two-way standpoint. If your bow gets knocked over and or if you're the person that knocks the bow over, how do you as a judge navigate that situation?
It's happened, unfortunately, for sure. There was a situation, it's SoCal, I think this year, that an archer, was walking through where the equipment was, stepped on a stabilizer. It was not intentional. I mean, it happened, but it caused it to break, caused it to snap. And the archery community is pretty incredible. I will say that first.
Sure, yeah.
And people came together and were able to help out the archer, because this was one of those situations they didn't have backup equipment for it. But this is why backup equipment is so important too, because these things do happen. When you have equipment lines and there's just bow after bow after bow, and you have to try to, finagle your way through to walk past to go to score, inevitably sometimes things get knocked over, and it might cause a sight to break, or, a plunger to be messed up, or whatever the situation. And if, that happens, if it is clear that that was not intentional, as a judge, we just handle it by how can we fix this? What can we do for the archer? How can we get them back up and running and make sure that they're able to continue on? If it's intentional, that's a whole nother thing. There's an actual rule, of course, that says that you are not allowed to touch other archers and other athletes' equipment, right? So if that was, found to be happening, somebody was messing with someone's equipment, someone intentionally broke something, they could be disqualified from the competition for it. So
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to prove, but I mean, I've had conversations with high-level archers, both on all levels or all disciplines, who have witnessed situations that appeared to be intentional foul play. It's sad that that happens, but we have not nice people everywhere in this world, and that does unfortunately happen in all sports in some capacity. Even in archery, it's been known to happen. It's usually it's usually just a poor decision that somebody within the competitive realm decided to do a thing, but it may be difficult to prove. You have to pay attention all the time. You can't be complacent when you're at a shoot. And that's I think sometimes people they get in their feels a little bit depending on how they're shooting, and it makes them then miss things. And that even goes along the lines of competing and shot process and form. You can't get in you can't get emotional about things. You need to just stay focused on every aspect of the tournament. When you do that, one, it'll make the tournament go a lot faster, and two, and smoother, and two, it keeps you in that present frame of mind of everything that's happening and going on, and your tournament will go much more smoothly. So perfect. All right. I think we're good. Success. First Coach Series episode is over. We covered it all. Thank you so much. I know you have some other stuff. I know you've done multiple seminars and whatnot. So, I would love to continue to collaborate on other topics as we go through this series, or if you have ideas of things. I think this is going to be a cross-posted episode. I kind of wish we would have And maybe we could do an addendum to it, or if there's any like nuances to compound an Olympic recurve, because I would love to put that on Peak Archery Project as well, because that is followed by a lot of competitive archers that are outside of Barebow. And yes, everyone listening to the Barebow Project, no, Barebow isn't the only archery going on in the world. I know we all think it is, but it's not. You know, and I think that there's this resource can still be valuable to that side of the disciplines. So with that being said, Christy, good night. Thank you so much once
Thank
again.
you.
Everybody who's watching in on Zoom right now, thank you all for joining in and supporting the Barebow Project through Patreon. And the rest of you, shoot straight or shoot often. Barebow Project out.